Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We are all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
And hello to Popcorn Psychology. We're actually back together today for the first time in months. We've been recording remotely due to the global pandemic we're all experiencing. And today we're actually all together in Hannah's apartment. We are 6 feet apart from each other, but we are here together. And so today we actually is a fan request. It is a request from what I would call our biggest fan, our super fan, Janae. She is an actress who lives in Hawaii. We interact mostly with her on Twitter, and her Twitter handle is actually at P31Mission, if anyone wants to follow her and kind of see the things that she's doing. She requested this movie, as she is actually an African-American woman, and she requested this to us as a movie that is a big impact within the Black community. And so that is what we're talking about today, which is The Wiz. So for people who are familiar, The Wiz is a reboot, remake, remodeling of The Wizard of Oz, but more focused on concepts and situations within the Black community. It hits the same essential beats of Wizard of Oz in that it's Dorothy, who gets caught up in a tornado. She goes to a mystical land, which looks sort of like a magical version of New York. She meets the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion, and then, has to go to see the Wiz, and then she has to go kill the witch, Evelina, I think is that one, and then discovers the Wiz is a fraud, and then ends up back home. And so that's what we will be discussing today. The main topics we will be hitting on is anxiety and depression, kind of how it is exhibited in all of the main characters of the movie. And we'll also be talking about how systems can cause and exacerbate these symptoms, such as racism, gaslighting, generational trauma. And we'll also be talking about the social impact of this movie within the Black community, both when it was first released and I would imagine still now. So we can jump into it. So we can get into the boring diagnostic bit, but I shouldn't say that, as this is what we literally do. But so when we say anxiety and depression, what symptoms are we seeing that are criteria of anxiety and depression within this movie?
So when we talk about anxiety and depression, we should probably run down the symptoms of anxiety and depression for people so that we know what they look like. Mm-hmm. And as we start describing them within the characters, it'll make sense. So we'll start with anxiety. Anxiety is a persistent sense of worry almost every day for almost all day for a period of at least 2 weeks. That's the base criteria. The other symptoms that you can see, you only need 3 of, which is very helpful for us as professionals, but it's also a shocking moment for clients a lot. But the 3 of these ones that you need, so you need to have, you can have tension, difficulty focusing, irritability. You have to have worry. That's one of them, right? So irritability, worry, tension, difficulty sleeping, difficulty focusing.
Maybe restlessness,
and stomach issues.
Mm-hmm. So, which a lot of people don't realize. You can have tummy problems.
A lot of people have tummy problems. Like, yes. If you are constantly not feeling good in the tum-tum, that it could be anxiety. Go like the doctor doesn't know what's going on. Maybe it's time to see your therapist.
Indeed.
But when you look at anxiety, those are some of the symptoms. And you have to have 3 of those in order to get the diagnosis. 3 of those plus the worry.
Yes.
And they can't be caused by, as with every disorder, they can't be caused by a general medical condition, an addiction issue, or another mental health issue. Mm-hmm. Like, so it would have to be kind of exclusive to that. And the important thing to note about generalized anxiety disorder is the other thing that doesn't get talked about that can lead to it getting diagnosed too easily is that it needs to be across settings. Mm-hmm. It can't be they're just anxious in social settings. It can't be they're just anxious about speaking. It can't be they're just anxious about work issues. Like, those are not generalized anxiety disorder. It would have to be this person is anxious, period, all the time.
Yeah.
In most settings. So that's your criteria for anxiety. Even for depression, we're looking at sadness for a period of over 2 weeks. You want to see many of the same things, which is where the differential diagnosis process we discussed before gets important here, and why we talk about can't be caused by another disorder, or better described by, because you can see weight loss, weight gain, feeling down most of the time, most every day. We got eating too much, eating too little. You can have anger and irritability, especially in men. I know we've covered that in our Beauty and the Beast episode. Mm-hmm. With depression, we also can see loss of interest, loss of pleasure. Mm-hmm. Am I missing any?
Negative self, a lot of negative thinking.
Negative thinking,
usually
negative
about yourself.
Right.
Or just kind of like the state of the world.
Right.
Like nothing's ever good happens, that kind of thing.
Right. So, yeah, right. If we talk about the through the cognitive theory lens, we look at for the negative triad, right? The negative view of self, negative view of the world, negative view of self in the world.
Yeah.
We for sure see that in these characters. Mm-hmm. That cognitive triad is really present throughout this film. Mm-hmm. All right, so that kind of covers depression and anxiety. And again, remember that they can't be caused by I'm depressed because I'm sick.
Yeah.
Like, that's not the same.
Mm-hmm. So I think straight away in watching this movie, this is the first time I had seen this movie. And so right away, I think this isn't very clinical sounding, Dorothy seemed very anxious. Like, she looked very anxious, and kind of what I mean by that is just kind of like the sort of like the restlessness. She was like moving around a lot, and kind of had this look on her face of she looked like she was worrying all the time, was kind of like the look she had. And also, which I think goes more towards like social anxiety, at least my hypothesis is, like, she's 24, but she's still living at home. She's not making a lot of changes. Like her Auntie M in the beginning is like, why don't you try to like find your own place? Why don't you try to like progress and work? And she seems very like, no, I can't do that. And it seems to be coming from a very anxious place, the way that she's kind of presenting herself. So a lot of anxiety, it seems like a lot of worry about changing things, changing her environment, changing what she's doing. Right.
She's very preoccupied with making sure that every need of everyone is met. She's not enjoying the party the same way everybody else is. She's very clearly got the weight of the world on her shoulders of being the one who's cooking and serving everybody, making sure the cake is ready, and like doing all these things while like not looking like she's even participating in the party. And I don't think it's the family leaving her out. It looks more like she is not present. And with so many people there, she's not engaging because she's engaging with the lists of things she's running down to try to make sure everything's perfect in her mind.
Yeah, she very much seems like she's like exactly what you're saying, like preoccupied with whatever kind of running thing is going through her. Like, I can't relax is kind of the look she has. Right. And that's what anxiety does to people, is it takes away the ability to relax and enjoy things because of the internal pressure you're putting on yourself to deal with resolving every problem that comes your way. Like, people with anxiety often take responsibility for problems that aren't their own, but the anxiety tells them it is, and that they have to get it right, or otherwise everything will be terrible, which is what the negative thoughts do. Is called catastrophizing. Yeah. Like, a big thing I say with clients is anxiety tries to lie to you and tell you that if you can just anticipate every problem and then solve all those problems, then all of a sudden you'll get this big feeling of relief that never comes, because anxiety is always like 2 steps ahead of you, looking for like the next thing that could go wrong. Right, exactly. It's very similar to what I describe, like kind of
a lot of them, like, imagine, like, gears turning. Like, anxiety is always looking for the next notch to turn the gears in the system. Like, it's always going click, 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 click. And if you think you get one that's turned, it's going to just start turning the next one. Like, it's I've come up with one, a metaphor that I use. I like metaphors, if you guys haven't figured that out by now. But basically, that, like, for those of us in Chicago, like, anxiety it's a lot like the red line. It's a natural system that exists in the brain for survival. And there's a difference between anxiety and anxiety disorder. And anxiety, the survival mechanism, is always running, just like the red line. It's a 24-hour train that goes through Chicago from the far north to the far south. It's running all the time. That train will take you wherever you let it take you. Once you get on that train at one stop, you're going to be on it until you get off. And if the anxiety needs to take you to one stop, you have to get off at that stop. If you don't get off at that stop, the train's going to keep going because it's a natural process that's designed for survival. And learning to recognize how it impacts you is really important. And it lies to you, like Brittany said, it takes that away from you to go like, no, you just have to stay on the train. You have to keep going. You have to keep thinking. You have to keep being a step ahead of everything and just keep going. But the reality is you have to get off the train and live your life at some point.
Right, because you can't predict the future.
Right.
No matter how much it feels like you might be able to, we can't predict the future. And there will always be things that we aren't sure of. But that letting that, the way that I talk about it with clients is a lot of it, anxiety kind of grabs onto an idea and just runs with it until like the end result is, you being homeless in the street. Like it very much grabs onto an idea and only gives you an outcome that if you really looked at all of the things that have to happen for that outcome to actually be true, it starts to feel very silly in terms of all the different things that would actually have to happen for you to end up homeless in the street. So I think that's one thing that I kind of, when I talk to clients about having depression and anxiety, the way that they work together is anxiety makes you freaked out about the future all the time and always gives this end result of, well, if you do this and this, then that might not go well. And then depression takes you, holds on to you and points out all the times in the past where things haven't worked out. So then it keeps you trapped and kind of paralyzed right in the middle of, I don't know how to make a step forward. And in the past, I've always screwed up. And so you just get stuck and are really unable to be present, which is what I think we really see, which I think you guys pointed out really well. I feel like one of the things I noticed about her in that scene, at the party was when she very much is not present. She's like, you can tell like she's almost running through the list of the things she has in her head so she doesn't have to be present because it's too uncomfortable in some ways too. It's in some ways, not necessarily that it's easier. I don't really ever like to use that term with clients, that something is easier. It has a lot more to do with it's sometimes we have certain ways that we deal with the present and deal with the things that are happening in front of us. And sometimes the only way we can do that, the only way that it's comfortable is to be disconnected because it's too scary to be present and to have to let go of the idea that whatever is going to happen is going to happen and that you're there and that you've been through things before and that you'll continue to be able to be through things, to deal with things in the way that you've always been able to deal with them.
No, it's definitely like letting go of the mirage of control, which is really hard. It's really hard. And exactly what you're saying. I know there's a name for this, which I do not know. But there's like a list of kind of like the ways anxiety can present. And it's like catastrophizing is one, fortune telling is one, like you mentioned, Hannah. There's like, I think 8-ish
so
of them.
Burns Thinking Errors. From Burns Feeling Good.
There you go.
That's the book. That's where they're from. Yep.
I don't remember what anything is called. And so that's kind of what we're speaking of, like exactly what Hannah said, which is the fortune-telling part of it, which I can just anticipate. And I think, too, with Dorothy, kind of what we're saying is, like, definitely the fear of if I move forward, what if it goes wrong? Like, I already know how to be a kindergarten teacher. If I try to teach, I don't know what high school's like. She kind of says that when her aunt brings that up, like, well, you could teach high school and then it's like older kids and you can have more of like a relationship. And she's like, no, I'm familiar with kindergartners and I know what's going to happen when I engage with kindergartners. So I'm going to stay engaging with kindergartners, even though that keeps you stuck. And like, also, like we said, like living with her aunt and uncle, even though seems clearly too old to be living with them. And they're clearly like, you should get up out this house. Like they definitely have this energy of like, why don't you find a nice apartment? That's not with us.
And I think what we see in terms of depression and anxiety, the impact they have is that this fear of, if I do something different, then I won't know what to expect. If I do something different, I don't want to have the chance of failing. And so what we kind of see, so when I talk to clients about how sometimes we have to push past those things and kind of like be courageous for like 10 seconds or something in order to make a decision to kind of, let's just, you're going to have to set in the discomfort and have to learn how to set in the discomfort of something. And sometimes that can be incredibly hard because it's not only the depression and anxiety. I think one of the other parts of this, which I know we're going to talk a lot about today, is how the systems of oppression really exacerbate any of the symptoms that we've talked about, because it becomes not only having all these internal thoughts and feelings, but then also getting having a lot of external experiences with other people that can really reinforce all of those different thoughts and ideas that you have and end up making it feel where you end up just kind of feeling dehumanized in terms of everything. So thinking about having depression and anxiety and then also living in a society that separates you from everything and makes it seem as though you are not human in a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm. And so when we say depression with I know we kind of talked about like anxiety pointedly with Dorothy, but with depression, I think it can be, because we don't really have an in-depth conversation with Dorothy about what's really going on with her in her inner mind.
No, we really get only her songs.
Yeah.
And her conversation with her aunt.
Yeah. But my assumption would be is that there's probably where like maybe a depressive piece is interwoven in, is like feeling maybe like I'm not good enough to do anything different. So if I take a chance and go against my anxiety, I also don't know if I'm a good enough person to overcome that and succeed, or
if I'm worth it.
Yeah. And just also like not having because like part of like at her age wanting to move out is because I want to be autonomous, and I think I have the wherewithal or the self-worth to be independent. And so when you don't have good self-worth, like it's hard to want things for yourself and want things for yourself in an independent way. And so you can stay locked in these situations where you maybe live at home for longer than you plan to, or stay stuck in places as well, because if you're not also anxious and then also feeling like you aren't worth it enough to try, you will stay locked in these zones, which is why it can be really difficult, and why a lot of clients I work with who have one or both of these disorders, like just the motivation's what I hear the most. Like I just don't have motivation to move forward, or I don't have enough motivation to counteract my fear. And so they get locked in these holding patterns.
And it holds you there. That's a really good word for it, is locked in and holding patterns, because it's the way they work together. The word we use for when you have concurrent mental issues, mental disorders that you're experiencing is comorbidity. Mm-hmm. And the comorbidity between depression and anxiety is a really challenging one for people to experience. And it can really impact your life in a lot of ways, because like Hannah and Brittany have illustrated really well here, is that it locks you in because you don't feel like you're worth getting the effort put into you by yourself or by other people investing their time and energy in you to develop you, to help get you out of the spot that you're in. You don't feel like you're worth it, and you worry that even if you asked for it, you wouldn't do it right, so that it would all fall apart anyway, or that the unnamed adult in the room would come in and tell you that you've been doing it wrong the whole time, which is part of where the imposter syndrome part of anxiety comes in too.
And so I don't know if we have any more we want to say about Dorothy, but when she moves into kind of Oz, their version of Oz, which is more like a topsy-turvy version of New York, the first person she encounters is the Scarecrow, who in my opinion, is the clearest representation of more like depression that's caused by abuse and gaslighting. And so with him, I mean, it's very standard, like very low sense of self-worth. Like he spends most of the movie really talking down about himself, like talking about how dumb he is, stupid, ignorant, how he shouldn't make any choices. Like he just is so disparaging towards himself almost the entire movie, even while he's doing things like Dorothy demonstrates at the end of the movie, tells him, that go against the very things he's saying. Like saying, I'm so dumb and I can't read, basically, while reading very wordy, complicated, philosophical quotes.
Right, he's got he's stuffed with lines from classic literature, all of which he's read.
Yeah.
And the way that his inflection is right, the way he pronounces everything is accurate. Like, it's one of those things where sometimes people who have depression and anxiety have a really hard time having awareness of things that are positive. I feel like that's something that is it's a really good example of someone who is saying, I can't do this, and yet in a whole other way, they are absolutely doing the thing that they were already saying that they can't do, or that it's really hard to do, or it's really hard to do in this context.
Right.
Whatever that might be.
Which in the words we're looking, it's the thinking errors is what Brittany was talking about. Mm-hmm. The Burns, the thinking errors, the standard thinking errors, and that one is called mental filter, where you can't see the positive.
Yes, which is why, because I'm a therapist who's in therapy. I think we're all therapists that are been in therapy in the past or currently, and that's why. Truth. We have to go to therapists, because I've had more than one person, including my mom, I don't know if she's listening, hey mom, ask me, well, you're a therapist, why do you need to go to therapy? Don't you know all of the stuff? Because of this specific situation in which you can't see outside of your own self. It's like trying to look at a painting with your nose up to the painting, like an impressionist piece of work. You're only going to see the brushstrokes, you're not going to see the actual picture itself. And so you do need someone outside of yourself to kind of point out exactly what you're saying, Hannah, like the positives about ourselves, or kind of pointing out this thinking error and where we're contradicting ourselves. Like with, this character, the Scarecrow, would be like, but you just said that thing and you just wrote that. So, and kind of helping you like flex that muscle of noticing the positives about yourself and getting more comfortable identifying yourself, the positives within yourself. But you can't really see that in the beginning. You have to do a lot of hard work to get there. And so you need an outside, typically unbiased third party, aka a therapist, to tell you that. Because even if a friend told you that, or a parent or a loved one, you could just easily say, oh, you're just saying that to make me feel better. You're saying that because you're related to me, so I'm a reflection of you. All stuff that I have thought myself. Hannah's making a smirk face because Hannah's my best friend and she knows what she's like to deal with me. And so that's a very big reason why in depression you do need that outsider perspective, because in the beginning, just that muscle in your own mind to notice positives about yourself just is either non-existent or is like atrophied to the point of unused, like you're not able to use it at all. And so every time you point out like a positive about yourself, or maybe in the beginning accept positives that other people are pointing out, you're flexing that muscle and it'll get stronger to the point that you can do that yourself. But it's hard when you're in the depths of it. And I think, not to get too in the weeds about it, but I think specifically with the Scarecrow, he has a system around him, the crows, who are constantly confirming the beliefs he has about himself. Well, you're dumb. You don't know any better. We know better than you. And they're just keeping him down constantly. And what's really dangerous and evil about the way that they do it is it's under the guise of caring for him and loving him and protecting him, which is gaslighting, which is, no, you need to trust us because we know what we're talking about and you don't know what you're talking about, but we know and we're taking care of you. And it's a very, I hate to say artful way
it's masterful. It's not even artful, it's masterful.
Yes, of keeping someone down and basically tell them that they're a piece of shit without outright saying you're a piece of shit. And not only are you a piece of shit, but I am taking time out of my life to take care of you.
I am your salvation.
Yes.
I am your and I'm right about you. But the only way to do it is my way. And you have to let go of the thoughts and things, the individuations that you're doing, and let go of it and think like I do and see yourself the way I do, so that you can build yourself up from the piece of garbage you are into an awesome person like me. Like, and that's where the masterfulness comes in. It's done the same way across cultures, across settings. The people who do this, we see it in stories all the time. They're so good at it, and they just dig in. And I think with the Scarecrow, or I would offer like a point of contention, I think he might be depressed because of what they tell him. We don't see him ahead of time, but
True.
The subtext that spoke to me, that's the subtext I saw as my interpretation. I think he
Yeah.
might have been someone who he's been around these crows his entire existence. So the only message he has is that he's trash and that he's trying to fight his way through and out of that. Much like, we hear that story all the time of kids that come from underprivileged situations where they are actually gifted with intelligence, but they have to fight their way out of the system and out of the voices around them of people who are spewing negativity. And then it becomes not only the mental filter part where you can't even hear it, but the disqualifying the positive, like you were talking about, where he is actively refuting when people are giving him the positive compliment. So he's not only doing it in his mind, but he's actively saying it too. So he's showing two of those thinking errors at once. And I think for him, that his story probably would have been different had he not been around those crows.
I think about it in terms of, a lot of times I feel like I talk to clients who have had persistent depression their whole life, that there's all these situational factors that can then also have an impact on it. So again, we don't know what he was like in the past, so it's hard to know if he was depressed before. But the way that I talk about it is, someone who already has always struggled with depression and anxiety for all different kinds of reasons, and then you're in a setting or in a situation that anyone would have anxiety or maybe be depressed about, and how those added things then create more barriers to being able to see any positives or to be able to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. Like sometimes it's impossible to even consider that there would be light at the end of the tunnel. So I feel like as we were kind of talking about it, that's what popped into my head, just in terms of how even if the scarecrow only had some depressive symptoms sometimes, like maybe being lonely or maybe, I don't know, all different things, all different worries that he might have at that, and then being put in a situation where the people around him are really negatively affecting his sense of self. And one of the most harmful things that happens when we're in a gaslighting situation is that we doubt ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's the most harmful piece of all of this. And I think that's part of what we see in his kind of not really being able to hold on to any of the positive things or the things that people are pointing out to him, because it doesn't feel like it can be true, because you've been told for such a long time that what you believe about yourself is wrong. Mm-hmm. And that can be very difficult to shift. It does happen and people can heal, and there are lots of different ways that we can help people do that. But at the same time, watching those scenes last night when me and Brittany were watching it was, for me, it kind of brought up all of the different experiences that I've had with clients who are like, but I felt this way my whole life. It's like, right, but also you are also currently in a situation that is exacerbating all of the things you already struggle with on a regular basis, and trying to help them have awareness that to help normalize in terms of the situation you are in is already really hard, would be really hard for anyone, on top of the fact that you also struggle with these other symptoms. And that can really just exacerbate the situation and make it that much harder to have motivation or to have insight or to have awareness about the positive things that you are actually doing, or being able to pick up on any of those points.
I mean, it's to get into, it's like the nature versus nurture argument too. I think exactly what we're saying, which is, would he have always been disposed to depression? Because some people have, no matter what their environment is, they will experience depression. All these things will happen, all these symptoms we've talked about will occur with them, even if they've had the most loving family, the most prosperous childhood, and they just are sad for no reason, and these symptoms just come up, and that's a whole other thing. And then there's this camp, which is more of what we're discussing, which is it entirely situational? And once you get out of that situation, you're going to have still the symptoms of depression that you'll have to work through with therapy and interventions and things like that. But will you ever go back to that place you were in once you've kind of worked through that environment and gotten out of it? So it's almost more leaning towards depression that's caused by abuse and trauma versus just chemical depression that's caused from the misfirings of the chemicals in your brain. But either way, you treat them similarly, and either way they can present very similar, but the interventions might slightly differ in the sense of, with the scarecrow, I don't know if he could have ever progressed if he didn't get away from the crows the way he did, and get into an environment where he had supports like Dorothy, which were building him up versus breaking him down.
Yeah, I think he's going to struggle. for a while with trying to figure out what his meaning is. It's like the cave metaphor from the Republic book. Do you ever read the Republic? Do you ever take philosophy?
No.
Need to. The Republic kind of details how people think and explores the nature that if something is the only way you've seen it your whole life, and you've had that shown to you, you believe that is an inherent truth, even though it is not, because you cannot have any other reference point than the one you've been shown. And for him, it's going to take him a while to learn to break out of that reference point that he is dumb and he doesn't fit in and he's all these things, and all of the garbage that the crows feed him and the way they treat him and abuse him and then make him into their clown and defeat him even further by shaming him.
And keeping him in quite a literal stuck position.
Right. All he wants to do is get down, and they won't let him. I think, for me, the story I saw with the Scarecrow, which you can detail more lately, is the story of the intellectual urban kid who the kid who's intellectual and doesn't fit in with the crowd that he's around. For the purpose of this story, would be the urban kid who's like able to be intellectual, engage, smart, highly intellectual, high IQ, doesn't fit in with those around him, doesn't have the same interests as those around him, and gets bullied into doing the things that they want and acting the way they want, but he'll never be part of their club. But that's what he wants because that's what he knows. That's the story I saw with Scarecrow here. And I think that, like, seeing the way that Michael Jackson depicted the impact that had on him just through his facial acting, even with all that makeup on, I thought was outstanding.
I think I saw it more as, and we might speak to this later when we talk about more like the social impact of this movie, of more of one group keeping another group down. Like, you should be happy with what we're allowing you to have, which is kind of being amongst us, but you're not better than us. You're never going to be anywhere close to us. And continue, like, trying to keep him ignorant, trying to keep him down, basically, and keeping him in a stuck position and making him seem as like there is no growth upwards or outwards.
But I don't think it was a different group. It's the same group. It's the same social stratification, trying to keep him down instead of building him up so he can grow out of it, even though his natural potential was higher than theirs.
Maybe.
It's a little bit different than we see the other side. You're talking about the one group pushing down, versus this is the in-group holding the in-group down because they're trying to maintain homogeneity, which happens in social situations all the time, as groups try to maintain a homogeneity to themselves for in-group versus out-group. But he's never going to be part of their in-group, ever.
And I think one also interesting thing to note about the Scarecrow character is he has such a sunny disposition, which I think is a good thing to reflect on, is that a person doesn't have to look like or act like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh to be depressed. A person can experience all the symptoms of depression and come off like a sunny, happy, jolly, friendly person. And I think that can actually... obviously works against them in the sense that then people around them maybe don't believe that they have depression, or they don't take it seriously because they're not sad and crying all the time with like a cloud over their head. Yeah, absolutely. I think people, I think that would make a lot of sense that would be something that a person like this would really struggle with, because that's definitely something that I hear from all different kinds of clients, that, well, I'm kind of like have this sunny disposition, and so everybody feels like how could I ever be that sad, and why can't I just get over it? And that it's how no matter what you think you know about the way that someone acts, you don't know what goes on internally for them. And so making assumptions that someone can't have depression because they seem happy on the outside is pretty silly. Like, no one knows what's going on internally for us besides us, and even sometimes that can be hard to have awareness of because of all the different things that are going on in our heads.
And if you doubt that, there's a whole Reddit subchain, and I'm sure there's one on Twitter too, of like the faces of depression. Yeah. And it's heartbreaking and sad, but it's important to realize that it drives Hannah's point home, that you'll see pictures of people who were either taken right before they went to the hospital, right before they tragically decided to take their own lives, or they had some kind of crisis, and you'll see all kinds of very normal, smiling-looking faces, and people will either detail their stories or the stories of their family. And it's important to remember that you can't see feelings. You can sometimes see, but you can't see the inside of someone's head. You can't. Mm-hmm. And it's the only thing that you can do is pay attention and ask. Mm-hmm. And if you never ask, you'll never know.
Yeah, just don't make assumptions, everybody. Don't think you know what's up.
Let's talk about the Tin Man. Mm-hmm. This was an interesting take on Tin Man. Rather than be the Tin Woodsman, he was
like
part of a amusement park.
Is it like a barker? Is that what they call them? When they're like, "Hey, come over to the show." Like,
right? Those
characters who kind of like hail people. Hannah's looking at me crazy. People who hail people in. And kind of like show off,
kind of like the salesman of whatever the
amusement park.
Yeah, whatever the amusement is that they're trying to get you to come into. Yeah, mm-hmm. I think you're absolutely right.
The carnival workers, the guys, the game guys who.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so what we see with him is I don't know. I'm curious what you guys think, because I think with him, I mean, it's a similar. I mean, it's all kind of a metaphor for kind of the same thing, but he's such an emotive person. Like, he's really angry, and then he's crying about his fourth wife, and he's obviously very full of love or like at least desire. And he keeps saying, "Well, I don't have a heart though." Because that's something that is an idea that's been projected onto him or been told to him, which is, but you don't have a heart though, so your feelings aren't real or they're not valid. Yet he's constantly emoting, like all the full range of emotions you can actually have. Like, he's had 4 wives. You know what I mean? I mean, they were, at least Teeny was a full sculpture. I don't know what that deal was, but you know, he's such a big presence in the movie, and such an emotive person. And yet keeps acting as if, but you have to, but see it though, I don't have a heart though. Like, I have to believe what everyone's been telling me, which is that I actually don't have feelings, even though I clearly do.
I mean, he cries so hard that he rests himself.
Yeah, and then he cries so hard that he wakes them up out of the poppy, fog they're in.
Yeah, those are really, I mean, I think even just that idea that being sad and being that outwardly sad also can make us feel stiff in real life, and that it can be hard to kind of make movements past that, especially once people have seen you in that way. It can be hard to move past something else. And so I feel like that's a part of him getting stuck in his own and kind of his own emotions. Like, he's so emotive and his mood is so all over the place that it's hard for him to be able to have awareness of even kind of what's happening, or being able to kind of put the pieces together, which is why I think he comes back to this idea of, yeah, but I don't have a heart. That's a part of this whole thing. I don't have a heart, and that's what everybody keeps telling me, and that's what the problem is. Even though I feel everything so intensely, that's what I'm supposed to believe.
Which I think speaks to, similar to, I mean, it's all going to be similar, is with the Scarecrow, is this idea of, you're kept ignorant of a certain part of intelligence. And with the Scarecrow, it's more intellectual intelligence. And I think with the Tin Man, it's more emotional intelligence. He has been taught, he's been sold a set of goods that's not feelings though. That's not what that is, even though he is really emotionally intelligent, or he's capable of a lot of emotional intelligence. And he's been taught, that information's been kept from him and been misconstrued by, I assume, whoever quote unquote owned him within the amusement park company, to keep him down as well. We're going to keep dehumanizing you, because what's one clear way of dehumanizing someone is by declaring that they don't have emotions, or they don't feel things the way that quote unquote real people feel things. And that's something obviously that's been done to the African American community over the years, especially during times, I shouldn't say especially because I don't know if I know any better than this, but I know when we were owning slaves, when white people were owning slaves, it's the big thing was, they don't feel pain like we do, and they don't feel feelings like they do, and they don't love their children like we do, so we can take their children and we can sell them. And so it's this selling and like repeating that narrative to this, like the people we're oppressing as well, of, well, you don't really have real feelings, and I also have to tell myself you don't have real feelings in order for me to do the mental gymnastics of owning a person. Is I have to then tell myself over and over again, and the people around me over and over again, that these aren't real people, though.
I think all of that is true with his story. There's one more point to it that I saw. Again, this could be just my perception of it, but in hearing him talk about his story, the one thing that I didn't mention with anxiety was guilt, and depression is guilt. That's a massive symptom that I failed to mention. But the guilt that he feels for tricking people for a living, for doing something that he knew wasn't quite right, that they couldn't quite win, that he had traded part of himself to be a con man, to hook people in, and he felt like that is part of where his not having a heart came from, which is a story that we see happen to people who are trying to fight for comeuppance in the world, is that they have to go to the haves to cop a fix. But they are still only allowed so much, but they have to sell the narrative of the haves in order to get their little bit, their little piece to survive. And I saw tremendous guilt in him about that, knowing that that is what he did in order to make himself viable and survive for him and his families.
It's being a part of the system that is oppressing you.
Right.
Which I think all do, to a certain extent, subconsciously, consciously, and then carry shame from that. Shame is also, like you're saying, a big part of depression as well too, and anxiety, of like feeling shame about the way we've behaved or the way we currently are. And exactly what you're saying is, I was part of the structure that I don't even agree with. What kind of person am I?
Right. I was part of the oppression system that, but that's what I viewed myself as having to do. But he knew what he was doing and why, and that's the thing that drives him to feel like he doesn't have a heart. When he's talking about how I don't have a heart, he's using that as evidence against himself. Yeah, that he did that. That's why he doesn't have a heart, because people who have a heart, the inference is people who have a heart wouldn't have done that. Wouldn't have sold their soul to have their bread, basically. And he doesn't, because he literally doesn't have a heart, and then has been told this narrative about not having a heart. He does not know that having a heart or not does not a good person make. In terms of people who have hearts also make these decisions, make worse decisions sometimes. And so that is not what makes you a better person or an actual person. And that is a narrative that's also sold a bunch, which is, but if you have this thing, then you just know better. And that's not true either. Yeah. And it makes me think of when I talk to people who have had to make decisions out of survival. Oh, true. And not like where they actually had an option. Like, I feel like that very much is what we see with the Tin Man. Like, it very much is an experience of him having to do his own mental gymnastics in order to survive, because he had to live a life and he had to be able to make a living. And so there also being this sense of shame and guilt that, well, even if you're telling me, like the therapist, like I'm telling someone that you're worthy and that you're allowed, you deserve these things and you're allowed to have these things, is that this sense of, yeah, but I was also a part of the problem, and not being able to let go of that and not being able to reconcile that for yourself, that really what was happening is you were in survival mode. And when we are in survival mode, we make the best decision with what we have in the moment. And sometimes when we go back and look at that, it doesn't feel as good, but also we're not also able to look at it and say, okay, but what was going on in my life at that time? Maybe he was getting divorced from his third wife. Maybe he hadn't had a job in 2 years. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's almost always so many other parts that go along with these decisions that then reinforce the thoughts and feelings that depression tries to kind of bully inside of us. And it really can become, and it really becomes in terms of, not a self-fulfilling prophecy, because I don't feel like that's exactly accurate, but a lot more just about how
that wasn't a choice that you made because you had different options. Yeah. That was a choice made out of survival. And that does not a whole person make. Mm-hmm. We all have to make decisions at some points in our lives that we wouldn't normally have had to have made because of the circumstances we found ourselves in. So I think there's a lot of that internalized, I'm a part of the problem. How can I then be happy if I was the part of the problem that made this system for people who are like me?
Which is the basis of Gestalt therapy, of you need to look at yourself as a whole, not a part.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I think I have this conversation a lot with people who have been part of like abusive systems as children, especially. Of you were like exactly what you're saying. You were making choices in the moment to survive. You know, not just because you, like you said, had all these options and you chose this option out of all the ones that were available to you.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, he wasn't treated well. He was discarded like a thing. When this amusement park went belly up. And then he was left like literally imprisoned underneath like this larger statue that was also his fourth wife.
Which was a mammy statue, which we definitely can't ignore that one.
Yeah.
And very symbolic.
Very symbolic. Mm-hmm. Lots of that in this film, but we'll get to that later. But, just can't let that one slide.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So we have our fourth main character, which is the Cowardly Lion. Is it like the New York Public Library? Is that what he was?
Yeah.
And he emerged from?
Yeah.
Which makes me always think of Ghostbusters. But anyway.
I had the same thought. I'm like, where's the librarian? Are they going to study? Is there a goo?
It made me think of the Chicago Institute of Art. They have those lions outside too. So I was like, is this Chicago? I was like, this is not Chicago. Why are you thinking about that? So I had a completely different thoughts.
No, I went to New York a few summers ago with my mom, and we went to New York Public Library, and it was under construction, the big room. And I was so mad because all I wanted to see was, one, a library because I love libraries, but two, where the Ghostbusters scene was. And I was so upset. I was like, I can't see the big room where a Slimer was jutting around. But anyway, we literally digress. So with the Cowardly Lion, similar, obviously very low self-worth, things like the lowest of themselves maybe. I don't know. They all think low of themselves in very different ways, so I don't want to compare like that. But truly thinks he's trash. Like, I am a failure to not just myself, but my family, my species of a lion. Like, I am like an utter failure. I had to leave. Does he get kicked out of being? He gets exiled, right? Or does he leave? I can't remember.
They convince him that he is not able to rule. I can't remember what it's based on, but essentially they convince him and then he doesn't fight back. Mm-hmm. Like he takes in that information and it's just like, okay, you're totally right. And instead of fighting or asking for support from people who support him, he was just like, okay, you're right, I'm out. And then he left.
So I think he makes me think of the idea of like when someone's really locked into an identity that I work with, and if they don't fulfill whatever that identity means, then they are failures and they are bad and they are like trash, and that they shouldn't maybe even exist anymore, and they don't know how to be anyone else. And that can be from a variety of reasons. Sometimes people just do that to themselves, like, this is who I'm supposed to be and I don't know how to entertain any thought, any identity outside of that. And then also, which I think is more indicative of the lion, is this is what everyone's told me I am, and this is the only way a lion can be, and because I am not fitting the status quo of a lion or meeting the standards of a lion, then I am a total failure and I can't be any other kind of lion. And then it traps you, and so there's anxiety and depression in that, and that it traps you in that holding pattern of, well, then I have no other options. I think that's a big thing with anxiety, is it makes you feel like there is no plan B. It locks you in a box. And so if that doesn't work out, then you are truly screwed, and then everything is ruined. And there's no flexibility. I think we haven't spoke about that yet, but a lot of anxiety and depression too has a lot of rigidity within it, which is things can only work out if they look like this. Or everything is either like a true success or a true failure. So rigidity can be things can only be a certain way, or it can be extreme thinking. Like, things are only successful if it happens just like this, and if it doesn't happen just like this, then it's a total failure. There's no middle ground.
Yeah, I talk about it in terms of, when I talk about it with people, is about being very black and white, and that we need to be in the gray, because we live so much more in the gray than we do in the black and white. And that I feel like the amount of times that I say flexible in a session is like at least 10. And and that I feel like I say that in every single session, because it's that sense of being able to be flexible with your thinking and flexible with your idea of yourself, and that there are different options, and that we can look at it in that way. But I think what happens with the lion is, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's like, you're not allowed to be a lion like this.
Yeah.
And therefore, you're not allowed to be a leader like this. And therefore, you are not qualified to be anything else.
Yeah.
And how that, pervasive thought gets in the head of someone who has anxiety and depression. And it's really hard to try to feel like you have another identity that would even feel comfortable, that I've only been this one thing and everyone's only seen me in this one way, and that one way wasn't good enough. So then how can I be good enough for anything else?
And part of what we see with him, with the lion in particular, in any depiction of the cowardly lion, is he must maintain that role in his presentation outwardly to other people. Where this version of the lion was done so well is that he is able to show that he embodies all of this roar, but he doesn't believe any of it. But he feels like he has to be that, because he has to maintain that, because that's all he can be. And even knowing that he can't be that, the lion is imposter syndrome. The cowardly lion is the epitome of imposter syndrome. I know that's a term that's getting thrown around more and more and more lately, because people are reporting it more often. But the cowardly lion is that, and this, what we see especially is out of men, when you feel like you have only so many options of roles that you can play, but you don't fit those roles, the only role you have to play is the one you know, and you play that role.
Yes.
And we especially see that with people that are from oppressed environments, because this is The Wiz. It's about the experience of black men that get this. If they are able to be in this role, that's the only role that they can have. And the lion does such a beautiful job of depicting that, of going like, this is the only role I have, but it's not who I am, because who I am has been crushed and manipulated out from under me. And the part of me that can be a leader and lead in my way and be the king in the ways that make sense to me, I don't see anymore, because all I've been shown is that I can be this thing, which I can't be. So now I don't know who I am or what I am, and it deflates him.
Yeah, I mean,
he's stuck in that role of presenting the outward aggression one.
I mean, I think it's, when I say, and sometimes people roll their eyes at me, is like, it's sort of like exactly what you're saying about men, is like the patriarchy hurts all of us.
Yes.
It doesn't just hurt women, it hurts men too.
Yes.
More in certain ways. And I think exactly what you're speaking to, which is I know lion is the metaphor, but a lion can only be a lion in this very specific, strong, aggressive, scary way.
Right.
And you can't be tender, you can't be emotional, you can't be like soft, which I know is a word that I think is going back, is kind of swinging more into a positive, like being soft, at least with the youth. No, hold up. When you're not on TikTok, so you can't talk about this. But being soft is something that's being more positively aligned now with the younger generation, which I think is great to see. I know but that's not pervasive across all communities, so I recognize that. Right. But anyway, I don't want to get in an argument with you about that, Benjamin, because I can see your face.
No,
I can see your face.
I mean,
it's going to be off the rails
within the men-to-men community.
Off the rails,
sure.
Like that's where, like being regarded as soft, especially in this community, that's not a thing yet.
Yeah,
I wish it. No.
Mm-hmm. I think it's getting there. At least maybe that's my optimism. But anyway, so I think. I hope so. With him, but I think it's also like pervades out, which is you can only, like, a good girl only looks like this, and a leader only looks like this, and a strong man only looks like this, and a smart person only looks like this, or professional only looks like this, which is a big one too. And so it's this, and I think with him more specifically, and I think this also happens a lot with men, you can jump in if you disagree with me, Ben, as our resident man, is not having role models that show him a different way of being. Like I'm assuming he's never seen a lion/man cry or act like softer or more emotional, or scared. And so he truly thinks he is an anomaly and that something's wrong with him. And that's something that I definitely experience as a therapist is we either can't see or we've never seen someone who acts the way that we act. And so we think that we are wrong, damaged, messed up, weird,
unique.
Yeah. What's a more polite way of putting it? And I think that's why what's nice about like him coming into this group where he sees all these feelings like the Tin Man crying and, Dorothy being like more emotional, even though she's a woman, which, which is why like sometimes group therapy can be really good is opening up your circle to people who you more align with, who model the behaviors you see within yourself and normalize them. Because that's all it is like certain things have been normalized and certain things haven't been normalized. And so trying to skew that and open up your worldview to all different sorts of things. And even when I work within family systems, what I'll kind of tell parents is you have to start modeling this different behavior so your kid can see it and so that they can realize that, oh, it's not just me who's uniquely broken or uniquely screwed up.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you. I think there's one more aspect of the lion that really is going to tie into where we'll move into later is the lion is also, he is almost a meta, like metaphor as well as he's a micro and a macro metaphor at the same time of what this movie even is allowing yourself to be yourself and do it in your way is the way to success. It is not ever in the way of crushing yourself into being the image of what other people want or want to see you. Is do it in the way that is authentic to you, that fits your needs and your culture, and then you can actualize and find success and find greatness. And that's the lion is like a metaphor of that as well as all this other stuff we're talking about. He's both because that's what the whole point of this movie being done was.
Exactly. So we've hit our big four: Dorothy, Scarecrow, Tin Man, Cowardly Lion. There's other scenes within this movie that kind of are also examples of these other points that we've been talking about throughout, which is systems, both like you were saying, Ben, micro, which is when we say micro, it's more like your family, maybe your work environment, like more like smaller personal personal systems you're in. And then macro is more like society at large,
right?
Stereotypes, literature, culture, the big stuff. And so I think we see a lot of micro and macro examples of systemic oppression, racism, gaslighting, generational trauma, like all these things that both personally and like globally keep people in a certain place and keep them feeling like they cannot either move forward or that there's not even the possibility of evolution and moving forward.
Right. So in this movie, we wanted to talk about the systems we see and how they're represented. I think we see that as soon as we get to Oz, we see the way this movie depicted it. We see a very typical American Thanksgiving or holiday. I'm assuming it's a Thanksgiving.
Because it's snowing outside, so I also assumed it was Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Maybe there's no Christmas decorations. We see a very typical American family gathering.
Yeah.
There's nothing about it that's overly like showing racial over or undertones. It's just pretty much a pretty typical American family.
And it seems very happy and positive.
Yeah.
And like loving.
And like all the different parts of the family. So like not just your immediate family, but like the extended parts of our family too. Because it was a pretty big table. But I think you're absolutely right.
Like it was done. It looked to me, the interpretation I got, it was like, hey, we happen to be a black family, but we are your very typical American family, and we do have the same traditions and cultures as everybody else. Like we're having a ham this time. Like it's that it was shot that way in my interpretation of it. Seeing that, and then watching the first time we get where it starts to flip is when Dorothy goes to Oz. Mm-hmm. And when we see those graffiti characters, when we find out, like, seeing these caricatures pull themselves out of the graffiti and talk about their experience of being trapped in the graffiti by the bad witch. Mm-hmm. The Wicked Witch of the East.
The one that gets squashed first?
Yeah.
Which is Evermean. I remembered.
What
Evermean.
What witch is she?
She's the one that gets
East.
squashed in the beginning.
No, the Witch of the East. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Or the South. No, Glinda's South, right?
Glinda's the South.
Yeah, so...
And then Miss One,
is
who we see is the good witch of the North. Or whatever the opposite of Glinda is.
Right, so she's the
I don't
East.
know my directions, y'all.
Anyway, so she's
Never
she's
eat soggy waffles.
The Wicked Witch
is
of
all
the
I got.
East. But basically, we see people starting to break out of caricatures right then. Mm-hmm. But Miss One isn't quite out of hers. She's sort of. She's like half and half. She's half in caricature and half not.
She's still very, like, tied into, like, numbers, and things have to, be, like, tangible and things you can write down, and, like, very caught up in, like, the numbers of it all.
But not
quite
just,
literally.
Not just caught up in the numbers of it. It's the gambling aspect of it. The lotto metaphors and stuff. Like, getting... caught up in all of that, like, still kind of playing the system and, like, trying to play your luck and pursuing things, but still chancing it instead of operating on a system where you can have a plan to do things your way in a logical way, pursuing the same type of path that anybody else would pursue. It's, well, you can, deviate from that a little bit if you want to play your luck and play the numbers. Like, so it's still showing a little bit of the oppression, and, like, the way the movie is set up is having... like meeting Miss One at the beginning and meeting Glinda at the end, as like you see the total transformation in presentation. Mm-hmm. But I think as far as like oppression, the first things we see is that people are being in this New York playground are being kept in these caricatures, and then we start to see this amazing blend of Afrofuturism with jazz dance and ballet dance and like more Afro-centered dances, and it starts to blend and tie things together to where it's the Munchkin Land is evolving into its own thing as opposed to being trapped in whatever vision the witch had of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like starting to evolve into its own.
Into its own thing, unabashedly so, like blending a mix of things that make it its own authentic experience, not something that can be defined in a narrow box. Like, nothing about this movie... from the point of view of the people who start to come out of the spell of whichever witch or thing they're under happens in a way that can be simply put into one box. And I think it's very deliberately done that way.
Because then I think the next system we see, besides one we've already talked about, which is like the Scarecrow and the Crow, we've already touched upon those. But like the next bigger system we see is when they get to the Emerald City. And they kind of see, made me think of the Capitol in the Hunger Games. All these people in really flashy outfits who are all dressed in green, kind of like the Wizard of Oz from back in the 30s. And the kind of theme of the song that they're singing is you have to be dressed a certain way. You have to look good. You have to it's very much like the Capitol of aesthetics, luxury, status symbols is what the word I'm looking for. Kind of being, but then very quickly we hear the Wiz say, no, now you have to be red. And so then everyone very quickly gets into red, dispels green entirely. And then it switches, I think, to gold and then into silver in like very rapid succession. And I think what that kind of signaled to me while watching it is these people are so distracted by trends and status symbols and fitting in that they are literally going in a circle around the promenade or whatever it is, the courtyard of the Emerald City.
But they're never being let in.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Oh,
that's never enough. Mm-hmm. That's the key point. It's never enough. Like getting caught up in all of that is feeding the system of oppression because yes, there's this like beautiful blend of culture and dance and world things that we see through this and high fashion, but it's also showing you that no matter what you do to play the game, in playing the game, you're losing.
Which is the big lie, which is if you just comply enough, if you're trendy enough, if you go with the flow enough, you'll get into like the bigger echelons. Right. But you don't, because the irony is keeping up with that is what keeps you stuck.
Correct, because you're spending all your money and time and efforts on that rather than
distraction.
Right. Correct. And we jumped a part, though, that's very important that I definitely want to talk about, because it scared the shit out of me as a kid.
Okay.
But watching it this time, I had a totally different take on it.
Yeah.
And the subway scene, that happens before they get to Oz. And I think, for me, what I saw was that the way that public transportation was presented, particularly the way it existed in New York in the 70s.
Ooh, scary.
But that's a scary thing. And like the witch's little minion guy with his two accordion dolls just scared the shit out of me when I was a kid.
Terrifying.
The garbage cans didn't. The pillars moving sort of did, but those two fucking things scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
But watching that now, like, I wonder, like, if he's a metaphor for drug dealers, and like that people, the only way that they could traverse the city was by going, you know, like they thought, like, well, we can't get a cab, we can't go every time Dorothy and the group try to take a shortcut or try to take a cab, it pulls away from them.
Oh yeah, you're right.
And that shit happens all the time and is racist.
Yep.
Period. Like I'm not sure whether they were highlighting the racism of like the cab drivers that happens all the time, which is something that Uber has kind of solved, but the
okay. I will say this about. Let me say this really quick. If you're trying to go to the south side, we're in Chicago. If you're trying to go to the south side of Chicago, right. I do know that Lyft and Ubers have gotten into trouble for declining rides if they're going to the south side.
I did. There was a time when they couldn't do that. I didn't know that now they can. Okay,
I've heard something along those lines.
Here's the other.
There you go.
And
so
here's the other. And here's the other thing with Uber and Lyft is that you also have to have a smartphone. You have to have a credit card.
True.
You have to have certain things in order to use those. But I also feel like I see the racism of taxi drivers on a consistent basis. I feel like literally, like none of us are out driving around that much at all. And I certainly am not. I'm basically driving to the pharmacy and that's it. But a couple days ago, I took a drive up Lakeshore Drive and something, I can't remember what happened, but either way, I see this woman of color waiting to get a car and like 2 or 3 cabs who don't have any people in them literally just go right past her. Right past her. And this is, and I can't imagine the difference of being on the south side. Like I'm still pretty much on the north side. I think it was in the Lakeview area. And it was just that idea of, and I remember having clients who worked in the community who would say, if we're here, we don't have any way to get to this other place that you need us to get to. Because even if we have money, they will not pick us up. Right. Like there's no, this isn't like maybe, or that's just something you think. It's like, no, this absolutely happens. So public transportation is one of the only ways that people of color can't get denied transportation, even though it takes longer and it's less consistent.
Right. And the thing that this movie is also showing is that there's, because of who gets relegated to it, it becomes a trap in and of itself that you have to fight your way out of. And the movie did an awesome job of showing that. Literally fight out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was where the lion had to, like, he ran through. He had to, like, come back and open the gate for them. That was the real moment of, like, coming of courage for him, is that he had to deal with himself to unlock the gate to get them out. Because he was free and clear. He could have ran. Mm-hmm. But, like, the way the movie, like, worked those things in, and, like, the cabs thing, like, I think they did that, like, deliberately to show the racism, but also to show that every time they try to take a shortcut to get to whatever they're trying to get to, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
But also the racist-ass cab drivers. Mm-hmm. But yeah, go back to the...
Well, I think what's also masterful, because with Emerald City, I think that kind of, in my mind, gets contrasted with the one of the more final scenes of the movie, which is when they go to the other Wicked Witch, Eveline, and how... It's also a system of distraction and oppression, but it's more what I would argue is more obvious, where like it's clearly like people being like in a sweatshop, literally a sweatshop was what it's called, like not being mistreated, not getting to eat lunch, not getting to rest, and being oppressed in that way. And I think that's more what I think mainstream culture, white culture, thinks of as oppression. And not so much realizing that, like the Emerald City, I think what I think is artful about that demonstration is that looks like people are prospering, but they're only prospering to a certain point. There's like a ceiling there that they're not reaching. And also, like, are they actually getting what they think that they're getting?
No.
It's more all of like a, like I said, like a distraction or a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like the illusion of success and prosperity.
It's the American dream thrust in front of you, to have the job, to be able to feed your family. It's the bullshit American dream that we're fed, and that people who are from lower SES are.
Well, what does SES mean?
Social economic status.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Who are fed even more along that line of you take the job that you can get, because one of Evelina's lines is that, like, you're lucky to have this job or something to that effect.
Yeah. Because she does absolutely say that.
Something along those lines. And like you said that, but like, what do you mean you're talking about you don't get a break? Like, you didn't get a break. You're lucky to even have this job.
You got lunch 6 months ago.
Right. Right. But all that is like showing like that even if you adhere to that American dream, especially for Black Americans with this show, is that you're still going to be seen as the caricature, because they're still all in these weird costumes that they have to unzip themselves from.
Yeah.
Which, like, wow, was that one a punch in the face? Like,
for real.
It needed to be.
I mean, I think what so artfully done in the movie was that throughout the whole movie, it's very much like a 70s aesthetic in terms of the costuming and the makeup.
Right.
Which is kind of nightmare fuel, to be quite honest. It made me think a lot of Neverending Story. Just like that time period of like mid-late 70s to early 80s. Just everything looks kind of like uncomfortable. To put it and so I think it was very poignant, like you were saying, Ben, for me to realize watching it, oh, that's not what they actually look like. That is a costume that they're wearing, and they're not just like the Scarecrow character with their, interesting makeup and stuff. Like, that is actually not what they look like.
Right, that is the oppression that they are suiting unto in order to do what they have to do. Which I think was powerful for Tin Man to see, is even though he got crushed into that scene, I think that also was important because he had to get crushed by that to really be rescued out of it. Mm-hmm. But I thought that scene was just, there was so much beauty in that, in seeing when they kill the witch, which happened so fast. Like, they're just like, oh, yeah, fuck her. This story wasn't about her.
Yeah.
This story wasn't about the witch. The Wizard of Oz was so much about the witch. The witch was a minor character in this. Mm-hmm. But when we're looking at what we saw in this film, was the witch is easily dispatched, but the work that has to be done wasn't dispatching the witch.
Yeah.
It was dispatching the messaging that people are getting, that in order to make it and fit in, you have to keep your head out of the bad news. You have to stay focused on the work. You have to be grateful for what you do have and not want more, and not want to be treated right, but just to be grateful that you can survive.
Which is the classic line that we hear that makes me want to go, it's so upsetting to hear and so frustrating and so like infuriating is, well, you should be grateful. That's like one of the biggest, most common like shutter downers when people are trying to voice like dissatisfaction within the community, within the systems. And then people say, yeah, but you have this and you have this, like you should be grateful for the things that you have. It's a shutter upper. It's just a shutter upper.
It's a shutter upper. And then when they flush out, go ahead, Hannah.
Absolutely. And I think that it's just a way for people to keep you in the place that they want to keep you in. I mean, the American dream in and of itself is it's a way to keep all of us on walking around doing that promenade in our different outfits. It's such a way to make it so we're all focused on only getting our own needs met, that we can't stand back and be with our community and take a step back and say, look, there are enough of us to make the change that we want to see. But if we are tied into this rhetoric of everybody is allowed to have the American dream and everybody is allowed...
Sorry, we're recording in Hannah's apartment. I don't know if you can hear it. We've locked her cats in Hannah's bedroom, and they're
in full revolt.
Yeah, they're in full revolt. They're revolting against their own oppression right now in Hannah's bedroom. So if you hear a slight pounding sound in the background, we haven't captured and kidnapped any people. It's Hannah's cats.
Yes. Or ghosts.
And
it's not ghosts.
And they're fine in there. Like, they're fine.
Are they fine like Batman's fine?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Don't even mention it. I heard that and I don't appreciate it.
So I feel like that's always a part of this, that idea of the American dream, that idea of if you yourself individually keep doing all the things you're supposed to do, then you will get there. And the problem with that is that then we all get so caught up in our own bullshit of trying to get there that we can't see outside of it. And it also, again, that same feeling of feeling like we don't have any options, feeling like there isn't any other way to do this. I haven't been shown any other way. I've never seen anyone else who has been able to do it in a different way. So it doesn't feel like I have any other options.
It's also the scam of compliance, which is part of the American dream.
Absolutely.
If you just comply enough, and you just need to play the game. If you just play the game, if you just listen, if you don't resist arrest, all that kind of bullshit, then you'll succeed. You will keep going up the ladder,
right? And
you will reach the top. And I think in this situation, it doesn't even seem like the Emerald City residents realize they're not making any choices. Like, they're not in control of anything. And so it just, I mean, the American dream is a scam. And I will say that outright.
There's the other point of the film.
The American dream, because it keeps us compliant as well. I mean, it's just the idea that if you just work hard enough, you should be fine. Hannah's cats are getting progressively louder. Don't worry, cats, we're almost done.
But and we see all that, and I think watching the people break out of those suits and like zip themselves out, the relief we see, the water washing all of that off of them and melting all of the sewing stations and melting everything down, all the system of oppression, like watching all that happen was just absolutely beautiful imagery, and the way it was done was incredible. And like it really hit me like wow, I did not get this the last time I watched this movie when I was 12. But
yeah,
I can see why it's persisted in culture is still because of like the power of that, what that was showing, and like showing not only that of people getting out of these suits and washing that away, but finding happiness and trueness, like barefoot in their underwear. I think like had it been cinematically appropriate, they probably would have been naked, and that would have been just fine. Because,
absolutely,
like that would have showed like the truth of it, of like it is okay, because then you're seeing progressively more like blends of all of these dances together, but there's so much of like distinctly African culture that's worked into those dances that
for sure.
Like you see like these, like own your culture, do it your way, do your thing, don't conform to what roles are prescribed for you, do it in a way that makes sense, that lets you be you, let you be you within your culture, and let your culture be seen as relevant and like important in its own right and valuable. And like, seeing the way the movie depicted that, I understand why it's so powerful for people, especially in 1978 when this came out. They are 2 years post blaxploitation films at this point, and to see like this reclaim all of that, and like shed all of that shit and just be you, be your culture, don't let anybody define that for you, I thought was incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. And I think the added of just seeing all of those people finally feel comfortable in their own skin,
right,
just kind of in general, and being able to see that, and being able to see all of the different types of people that were there, all the different colors of everyone, like how important that was, and how watching, like I could probably watch that scene every day for like 10 times, and like it just, because it just feels, the relief that you can feel that those people have is so palpable in that scene. And I think it does such a good job of really showing that, and the song, right? And the main, probably maybe one of the most powerful songs, the Believe in You or Believe in Yourself, I think is the name of the song that Diana Ross sings. And that idea that it's believing in yourself and being comfortable with yourself and knowing that you are allowed to live your life however it's best for you, and that you will be successful because of that, and whatever you are looking for, and not trying to do it along these lines that, to be perfectly honest, white people make for you, right, and make you follow this made up path that doesn't get you anywhere, because it's still a path that they made. and being able to make your own path and being able to be comfortable in yourself and in your own skin.
Right, and I feel like a George Carlin quote here. George Carlin's my favorite comedian ever. I wish so badly he were alive right now to see this nonsense we're experiencing. But he had this thing that he would talk about, like, it's a big club, and you ain't in it. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that was so well shed in this scene. Like, the progression of the music, the way, like, the exuberance, like, rises, and the comfortability in their own skin. Like, that's why they were wearing almost nothing, is because it was showing, be comfortable in your skin. Like Hannah said, it's like, allow your skin, your uniqueness, your colors to show. Be who you are. And don't be ashamed of it.
And this movie is, like, full of gems in terms of quotes. Like, I only wrote down 2 because I have a pattern when I watch these movies for the podcast where I take really good notes for, like, the first half. And then I just start getting into the movie and watching the movie, and then I just don't take any more notes. So I only have 2 written down, which are, I think, in the first half, which is, you're just a product of deductive thinking, which is such a therapist thing to say. I think Diana Ross, Dorothy, says it to the Scarecrow. And they told you couldn't do it, and you believed him, which I think she also says to the Scarecrow. There's a lot of good nuggets when she's talking to the Scarecrow.
There's a lot of really positive mental health discussions that are not like long discussions, but like different parts of it that I feel like the emotional intelligence that is shown in this movie, in this setting, is at this time is unheard of. I mean, like, it is such a beautiful... It just felt, as a therapist watching this, that part just felt really nice. Sorry, go ahead, Brittany.
No, I mean, I think you can continue. I think it's exactly right. I think there are so many poignant lines that are such, like, therapist lines, kind of.
Yeah.
Like stuff that you'd probably see on Instagram now with, like, in a cutesy font, like, on someone's post.
Yeah.
And they're all true. And I think they're all good mantras that someone could adopt from this movie to tell themselves, to kind of help themselves, like we were saying earlier, flex their thinking into, and also challenging the beliefs that they have about themselves personally, and then about the systems that they are within. So I guess we could slide into treatment with saying that.
Well, I think we need to talk about Glinda.
Okay, go ahead.
Like, the final, like, imagery we see, I think, for me, like, we talked about this a little bit off mic, but this was one of the most important, like, realizations I had, which is probably what the story of Wizard of Oz has always been. But the version with Judy Garland doesn't show it this way. Because
it's more of a fantasy.
It's more of a fantasy. It's more of like, oh, this was a dream state. Like, this movie was a spirit quest. I think that when we see, and we haven't even talked about the Wiz, like, at all.
Yeah, no, we haven't.
He's his own, like, own story of oppression and, like, discouragement, and also he trying to achieve the American dream, never quite getting it, like driving himself to literal destruction, trying to be anything within the system, can't even get elected as dog catcher, as he says. And so I think he's another example of someone who's trying to play within the system and, you know, go by the rules, and still can't, for whatever reason, cannot get any power. And so, to the point that he hot air balloons his way into a alternate universe.
Yeah.
Like, which is hugely powerful. But I think the thing that this movie depicted in a way, and maybe it's just my interpretation of it, but hell, it's, 1/3 my podcast, so I'll say what the hell I want. I've been around Hannah too long.
That's not a bad thing necessarily.
I like how there's a qualifier there. But what I saw about this was, when we see that final moment, like when the most powerful song happens from Glinda, like it just ties all of it together about accepting yourself. Be you. Let go of all the other stuff. Be you. That song was so powerful. And, like, when we got the lovely message encouraging us to do it, talking about that song was so impactful.
And I think it was kind of heartbreaking. The way that Diana Ross acted it was kind of almost like this sorrowful of, like, are you telling me that I could have gone home at any point? And she looks, like, really upset at that point. It doesn't feel like, oh, like, kind of, I think in more of the Judy Garland version, it's more of like, oh my gosh, like, I could have, like, it's more like the shiny version.
Right.
Yeah. Oh,
whereas
absolutely.
This one's more like heartbroken. And I think that's, like, speaking to the emotional intelligence of this movie, is I think more of the truth with people I work with, which is, I cannot believe I've spent so much time engaging in these patterns. And though therapy and the interventions aren't simple, once you start doing them and noticing the change, there can be that heartbreak of, I can't believe I waited so long.
Sure can.
To start making different choices, doing different things, that I've like wasted X amount of years I've been on Earth doing the things before. And I think, I can't remember if this was outright said in the movie, but kind of the things we'll say as therapists is like, well, one, what's the point of weighing on that? Like, you can't go back to the past. Like, all we can do is move forward. And I think Glenda says that kind of like, well, all you can do is try to go home now. Like,
yeah.
And I thought that was really beautifully done. And I think in any other movie that was a little shinier, kind of like the OG Wizard of Oz, is we want that to be such an elating, happy moment of like discovering the secret of the movie, that I think it would have bummed like the general public. Like, this is a bummer. Like, when she signs that she can come along, she's crying. Like, that doesn't feel good. And I applaud the movie for honoring that moment, along with all the other moments it honors. Like, that's only one of.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there was a clear, like you were saying, Ben, a clear messaging to this movie, that they weren't going to pull any punches in the values they were exploring.
None.
And I think that was a really more micro version of that I was really impressed by as a therapist.
Yeah, and seeing that song and like the power it had on her and the power it had on the Wiz too, of like seeing him kind of like admit like his full story, because his story came out sort of during that song. It's not like before where we found out that thing. Like, we realized that he was so wrapped up in trying to maintain the facade he felt he had to put, that he saw Evelina as his only threat. And he manipulated people into taking her out. Yeah. Because the only threat that could expose him was her. So he had to enlist people to take her out. When really we see that inside he is a broken, nervous wreck of a man who is living in a shell because he sold himself on the dream. He is the end product of everything else we saw in the film.
Yeah, absolutely.
The way they depict him in this one. He is the end product of even if you do all this shit, you're still not part of that club. You're still not part of the club. You can't get elected. You can't get this. You're still going to be feeling the feeling of fraud because, guess what? You're black still, which is the theme of this movie.
Yeah, yeah. And then the truth in the United States.
I mean, the ridiculous truth that, we need to see change. It's been too long, and there's been too much oppression and division based on silly things like skin color. It's absurd, the in-group, out-group in the United States. But before we get into, like, that's a massive platform. But I'm not even going to go there right now. But the thing that I wanted to say about this movie that hit me this time was realizing that when that song happens and it's time for her to click her heels, rather than everybody supporting her and waving to her, they all fade away. Because really what happened that in The Wizard of Oz that just blew my mind wide open was that all of these characters were part of Dorothy from the get-go. This was her managing her symptoms, her insecurities, and they were manifested in 4 different ways, and she had to confront each and every one of them along the course of the story. And maybe that's not a revelation to anybody else, but it blew my mind open.
It makes me laugh because I think I can just see you. I'm picturing you in my mind's eye, just sitting in the dark in your apartment, just watching the movie and just being like, wow. Just like wide-eyed, just saying, wow, to yourself for like 20 minutes.
But I feel like at the same time, I think that totally makes sense. And I did not see it that way, but hearing you say it totally makes sense. And it makes me think of the times that I say to clients when we hit a certain point in their treatment, which is you always had this in you.
Right.
I have said that to clients and said, you've always had everything that you need.
Right.
You just couldn't see it. And that's okay. Like, that's okay. But now you can. And what can we do with that? And just that idea in and of itself and how powerful I have felt saying that to someone who is in that place where they're ready to hear it, and how much that idea really can really shift the framework that we have set up that depression and anxiety keep us trapped in. That oppression and generational trauma and generational poverty also all have a huge impact on.
Absolutely. And like seeing this movie, Glinda's song ties all of that in. It's what, like you're supposed to see what you want out of a movie. But for me, that hit me the most of seeing that. Like, the whole point of this movie is that everything that you have and everything that you are is enough if you just let it out and don't qualify or judge it.
Mm-hmm. Which is kind of like the beginning in it's kind of the whole deal of therapy, sort of.
It kind of is.
And we're done. The podcast is over, guys. We've solved it. We've done it. We've said all we can say.
Given all of the lessons we could possibly give to you, and now it is your job to figure out how to be your most authentic self, because honestly, that's what makes you feel the best.
Well, I mean, I think...
Not even feel the best, but just feel the most comfortable in your idea of yourself, and feel most comfortable and really being able to trust yourself, because essentially that's one of the things that it really comes back to.
So I don't know if we feel ready to slide into treatment, because what's kind of coming up for me is when I've done work with because to be quite honest, I'm a white person, so, and the majority of the clients I've seen are white. I definitely understand if you are a black person or a person of color, you know, there can definitely be an inclination to see a black therapist or a therapist of color, not just because of like the in-group, out-group of it all, but because there is different ways that everyone speaks. There's I think what I liked about this movie was there was no code switching in it. Everyone was speaking the way they would speak anyway. They weren't whitewashing it for white audiences.
Yeah. Nope.
And so sometimes, as a black person,
is not for you.
Yeah. Sometimes as a black person or person of color, what can be comforting about seeing a therapist of a similar background is you don't have to change your language. You don't have to explain your language. You don't have to constantly be educating your therapist on what you're talking about. They just get it. And so I wanted to say that at the off point. And there's also really good organizations like the Loveland Foundation, therapists, Therapy for Black Girls, things like that you can find easily online that actually are directories of therapists within the communities that if you're looking for those are places you can start. Anyway, but I think a big thing kind of based on what Hannah was just saying is there's a kind of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, and was designed, I believe, predominantly for obsessive compulsive disorder. But what I kind of take from it and use in the work I do is the big theory behind, the big idea behind it is, what are your values? And is your day-to-day behavior going closer to or farther away from your values? So I think kind of, like I said, taking what Hannah was saying about your authentic self is examining what you do on a regular basis and kind of start more listening to yourself of, why do I do that? Is it because I'm trying to fit in? Is it because I'm trying to survive? Is it because I'm trying not to ruffle any feathers? And is that really my values? Or is it actually going away from my values? And I think when I've worked with people who have come more from abusive backgrounds or abusive systems, there is such little intuition, not because it isn't there, but because there has been no trust. It's been beaten out of them. Sometimes literally, sometimes just more metaphorically, kind of more what we see in this movie, where you don't even know what you like, more like, you know, like quite literally, like music, food, things like that. And then, so how can you even know like what is good for you? And so a lot of it can be rebuilding, like very basic, like what do you care about? What do you like to do? Like more just like listening to yourself in these very basic ways is where I might start. And then like how do you conduct yourself on a day-to-day basis in a way that aligns with your values? And also examining like the real world factors of what keeps you from your values. Is it because you need to survive certain environments you still might be in? How can you be your most authentic self and still survive those situations? I think what you have to always be mindful of as a therapist is that people don't live in a vacuum. And so you can say all these like fluffy therapeutic things, like do these interventions, say these positive mantras. But if a person is still in a place where they're unsafe, none of that shit matters. It's also like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like you have to feel safe first before you can work on relationships, self-actualization, all the things that are more up on the top of the pyramid. And so first you have to make sure people are in a situation which they can feel safe, and then you can work on values work. Or you do values work with still within the parameters, the barriers of the situation they're in, if they can't get out of it quite yet, or if parts of it are just unavoidable at this time. And so I think that's the first thing I would do if I work with someone that was in this movie is sort of what are you, who do you think you are? Like identity work, values work, and then how can you start doing behaviors in those moments that get you closer to it? And a big part of that as well, and what I kept thinking of watching this movie, is self-compassion, which is how can you have self-compassion for yourself currently, presently, in the every day-to-day moments when you want to be mean to yourself, when maybe the system around you is being mean to you and cruel to you. And then also, like we were saying earlier, being compassionate, practicing self-compassion about the choices you've made to survive, to get to this point. And so it's kind of, it is a lot of mantra work, actually. It's a lot of like affirmations, trusting yourself, like sitting in the discomfort of taking what feels like risks, even if they might not seem like risks to you or I. They can be really big risks to the person I'm working with. So, and a lot of it kind of as a therapist in those moments is more being like just a big old support and almost more like a life coach. Like, I'm here for you. I'm supporting you. I'm helping explore with you. Like, I'm moving beside you in a much more, in a much more specific way than maybe other things I'm working with, other clients I'm working with, where I'm more guiding them. This is more like being beside them.
And I feel like that comes back to something we always talk about on this podcast, which is meeting the client where they are and having the awareness as clinicians that there are always a lot of different steps to getting out of something, and that sometimes helping them identify what is the thing that is upsetting you the most, what is the thing that's frustrating you the most, or that you struggle with on, that's the most present in how you're experiencing life right now, and trying to slowly find different ways to make things more comfortable, to make things feel more, again, going back to the idea of feeling more authentic and feeling it more like yourself. I know a lot of times when I'm talking about affirmations with clients, it's a lot more about, which one of these feel kind of true, because I don't want to give you a set of affirmations that all feel like bullshit. Yeah. Because that's not helpful. That's like, and then can reinforce the idea of there's something wrong with me that I don't think that these are true. So it's like trying to really, again, going back to that idea of really meeting a client where they are. I mean, I think, I don't even know if we would see Dorothy in treatment after this experience. Like, I feel like a part of it might be more of what's the first step. And how can, and do you need help getting some support with making those first steps? But I feel like what we see in the film is that she has that support. And now that she believes that she has that support, and that she believes that she has people who love her and are supporting her and want her to do things and want to help her do whatever that might be, that might be all she needs. Like, again, not that all of a sudden she's not a Black woman in America, because that certainly continues to have an impact for sure. But at the same time, knowing that now that she believes in herself, that some of those barriers will be a little bit easier because she won't be internalizing as often as she would be had she not had that experience. So I feel like working with Dorothy would really feel more like, how can I help continue to support you and empower you and help you to continue to reach these things and fight back against the barriers you are going to come up against, because that is a part of working with people of color. Just in general is trying to, I feel like I've worked more with people of color in this last year than I expected, being at a private practice. And part of that has been really nice as a clinician, but also continues to show when I have clients who, even if I'm not the same person of color that they are, that having somebody who even has a fucking clue, not that white therapists don't have a clue, but I think more of what Brittany was saying of like having to explain everything and having somebody who can kind of reflect back something that feels very accurate. The amount of times in the last 2 months that I've had someone say, I was so relieved to see that there was a person of color that I could have as a therapist. And I had been looking for someone, I feel like this was like really like a whatever. I've been looking for someone like you for a really long time, and knowing how even the system that we are in as therapists also has a huge impact of systemic racism and systemic oppression and generational poverty, for that matter. Becoming a therapist is hard, and becoming a therapist and being able to make it through the process. So like, as someone who is Hispanic, only 25% of Hispanic people have a graduate degree. And that's like the first step of this whole process. So I feel like I'm really going out on
it's
a
okay.
limb here.
It's important stuff to say, though.
But I just, I think that would be one of the things that I feel like that would be one of the only things I would help Dorothy with. And that may be seeing someone more like the Tin Man or the Scarecrow and really just being somebody who reflects back to them all of the things that they know that are true, but they need someone else to point out for them to help continue to build their sense of self, build their ability to trust themselves in order to follow through with whatever it is they want out of their life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that where I'm going to go with treatment is, instead of describing what I would do, I'm going to take a different direction, because Hannah and Brittany both said it in different ways, is that what we see at the end of this film is a treated person. Mm-hmm. We see a person walking out of therapy, ready to go back to her life with a smile on her face and confidence. And that's the last shot of her walking out of the storm and back into the house with a whole new sense of life and purpose. So what we saw in this movie is the first time we've ever seen completed therapy. Is in
full circle.
Right, full circle, completed. But that's
absolutely
the idea of what you get. But what I want to tell you is that basically what we saw, to solidify my idea here, is that there's a therapy called IFS. It is internal family systems. The entire point of IFS is to break yourself down into parts like a family inside of you, and how it interacts, and how those parts each need to be dealt with, and each part of yourself must be divided, and it wants a different thing and needs a different thing. It plays a different role in your internal family system. This movie is that. If you want to know what that is and what that looks like, confronting Dorothy has to confront each part of herself, each of her anxieties, her anxiety and depression that she doesn't know enough, that she'll never rise above and be able to even use her obviously high intelligence to rise above the statue of being a kindergarten teacher in what I'm assuming is Harlem in the city, and to rise above that and to become an actualized person. And we're not seeing her. That's the Scarecrow. That's the part of the Scarecrow. And then we're seeing a part of her that would feel inauthentic, like she's somehow gypping it, because if she's not enough, if she's selling a fake dream, is being a high school teacher. That is she facilitating the system? Is she doing this? Is she doing helping use some sort of con to sell people on a false dream? There's Tin Man. The Lion, does she even have the place? Can she rise to that? Can she find it in herself to do that? Lion. Wiz, even if she does that, will she be enough? Will the world accept her? Will she be able to be seen as the whole of herself? That's what internal family system is all about. It's about breaking yourself into parts and dealing with the needs of each of those parts and making them, instead of work against each other, pull apart, work together as a team, realizing that each of them has strength and value, has purpose, and tying that all together into a completed person. And that is what we get at the end of this film. Mm-hmm. So internal family systems is definitely what the Wizard of Oz, at least the Wiz, is. And
I think too, and then we can wrap this part up, is there's a phrase that to build self-esteem, you do esteemable acts. And I think that's also something we see within this movie, is she spends the whole movie, metaphorically healing parts of herself, but you could also argue showing agency and empowering herself by being a help to others. And I think that can be a very practical way to help a client build themselves up, is have them do community work, volunteer, do things that give them a sense of autonomy, agency, just like I said, values work. Yeah, challenge. And then give them those moments of small wins and successes that builds them up, which can be really powerful when you come from a system in which you were demeaned for so long and kind of broken down and felt like you couldn't be a person who does good things and succeeds. And so it can be kind of what we're seeing her do in this movie, which is go out and help people that maybe are like you, do things that make you feel good about yourself, can be a way to build that from within as well.
Right. Yep. Good call. I left the self out of the IFS page. Oops.
Okay.
This is why it's good to consult with other therapists, folks, because you will, I got this shit locked up, but fuck. Forgot the self. Yes, good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brittany.
You're welcome.
I appreciate the pickup there.
So we do our final thoughts every episode, but this one's kind of also, which I feel like we've actually already talked about a bit, which is the social impact of this movie. Like I said, this was a movie that was referred to us from a fan who is a Black woman. And so this movie has a clear impact. I think it also makes it very obvious why I've never seen this movie. I'm a white girl raised in a white community. I know the song Ease on Down the Road. I've seen like snippets of The Wiz, but like I've never really been exposed to it as much as I clearly have seen The Wizard of Oz many times growing up. And so it was really illuminating for me to see this and be like, oh, no wonder this is such a big deal. Like, no duh.
Yeah, duh.
Mm-hmm. It was a much more moving, nuanced movie than I thought it would be. Additionally, though, scary. Like, there's a lot of parts in this movie. Like I said earlier, from like the costuming point and the makeup point. Woo! When those graffiti kids came off that wall, scary.
Oh, their eyes all distorted and shit. Yeah.
Yeah, the costuming of some of these things, very scary. The whole subway scene, very scary. Like, I was like, if I saw this as a kid, I think this would have given me nightmares.
I'm just going to go ahead and raise my hand.
Just because, like, the look of it, I was like, oh, no. Like, even, like, the makeup on, like, the scarecrow, I was like, oof, makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, you're like, your mental image of me watching this couldn't have been more wrong. And, like, it's okay because what was going on inside my head was what you envisioned. But what I was actually doing was sitting in my living room in the middle of the day today, finishing the movie, watching my child play while watching this movie, and thinking to myself, fuck, are there any more of these parts like this that are going to scare my 2-year-old? Because it scared the shit out of me. It still does. Like, seeing those, like, accordion things still, like, gives me the heebie-jeebies. Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I mean, I think it's a beautiful movie. All the songs were catchy as hell. Obviously, they're produced by Quincy Jones. I don't know what I was expecting. And it was just like such a beautiful, fun, engaging movie. The dancing and everything. Like, I loved it. Anyone else want to go?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I really like this movie. I think that I will definitely watch it. Again, I feel like, yeah, exactly, right?
Stamp of approval. Hannah will watch it again, ladies and gentlemen. That is a good movie.
Yeah.
It was, I think, seeing a movie like that and knowing the time around when it was made still kind of feels unbelievable, sort of, in my brain, in terms of all of the other kinds of movies that we've seen and movies we still continue to see that are missing parts of what it can really be like living in a world that sees you as only one thing. And so I really feel like part of Janae, the person who asked us to do it or pointed it out to us, really, I feel like her talking about how her watching this movie when she was a little girl and the song Believe in Yourself and how much that has helped her whole life be able to deal with the oppression that she's experienced being a Black woman in America. And so I feel like even knowing that this movie from such a long time ago still has such an impact really makes my hope being in us doing this movie is that more people will watch this movie, and that yes, there absolutely are some scary parts. I was definitely afraid in different sections that I didn't think would maybe be in this movie for some reason. But I kind of saw this movie one other time, but don't really remember it, and it just felt so different to watch it right now, and especially to know all of the different things we're currently experiencing in terms of a shift in the change in how we treat people of color in this country, and how there's so many things that need to be changed, and that maybe sometimes when you're having a hard time dealing with that maybe watching this movie to help remind yourself that there are ways that we can continue to work towards things and to be our most authentic selves that can continue to make those changes. And also knowing from people who aren't people of color that we need your support. We need all the help that we can get to make changes that have been in place for such a long time that even can be hard to see them because they've been in place for such a long time. Yeah, that's it.
So I'll talk. I've seen this movie several times. I and I've seen it produced at a play at a children's theater in Evanston with, I'm pretty sure we're all white kids, so missed the point there, didn't we, folks?
Yikes.
But which I think happens a lot. It's done in high schools, but I think taking in everything that Hannah's talking about here and Brittany's talked about what is going on in our world right now, and how powerful watching this was to see the impact of this. This is in 1978.
Yeah.
This is 10 years after Martin Luther King was shot. This movie comes out 10 years after that. That seems like another lifetime ago, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and like for us to be seeing so much still going on now, 40 years later.
Yeah.
40 years.
And for the things that they were saying back then and in 1968 and during the 60s are still the same things that are having to be said now, and are still getting, in some cases, the same exact response of the pushback that we're getting from the oppressor.
Right. I'm going to give my opinion of the film, which is that it's a wonderful film, and I will probably want to watch it more times now to take more of it in. And thank you, Janae, for that, because I don't know. I would have worked my way back to it eventually, but to see that and appreciate it now for the power that it has in the black community is, it's so important to be reminded of that. Mm-hmm. There are so many movies where people look like me. I get to see the heroes all the time that look like me, that I can identify with. I can't imagine what the power it would be like to finally see someone that looks like you. To do that. And we're starting to see some of that now. And we're seeing all these butthurt ass fanboys, all these white neckbeard motherfuckers on the internet. Shut up.
Well, I mean,
please.
The way
stop
that John Boyega has been treated throughout the Star Wars universe, the way that Anthony Mackie has been treated as the next Captain America, there needs to, I would say even with this movie, I never just happened upon this movie. I think on TV. What I was telling Hannah yesterday when we were watching it was, this should have been a movie that I would have stumbled across on a Saturday afternoon as a kid on TNT.
Right.
Why didn't I? Why wasn't this... Shut up. But for real though, why wasn't I exposed to this movie naturally the way that I was exposed to Wizard of Oz and to every other movie like this growing up?
Right. And just to see the representation of it and the messaging in it of be able to own yourself. Be who you are. Do not try to fit into the mold, because you will never win that way. Be yourself. Do it your way. Be who you are. And not only the power for the black community is do it while owning your heritage. Your skin color. Be comfortable in it. Be you, and don't let anyone tell you it needs to be a certain way or a certain thing. And I grew up in a very, very diverse community. I'm well aware of my whiteness in the community, and not going to I had a black best friend. Not going to do that. We're not going there. But what we are going is for me to have had teammates and friends, and to see how many heroes that I grew up with, watching all these movies of the superheroes, and none of them looked a bit like them. And the stories that they had were totally different than that, and that were marketed towards them were not much different than the blaxploitation stuff, just aim more at other angles. And to look at that now and think about that now, and to wonder what power this must have had over people who got to see it when it came out, when it was made, to see all these mega stars, these legends come together and produce this film. The power of that psychologically in breaking the mold is huge. And I just appreciate that so much, to be able to know that exists, but to also recognize that more change needs to happen, that the fact that had to exist and had to be what it was, where there's not one white face in that movie, which, is good. There's overrepresentation.
I didn't even notice that.
Not one.
Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Mm-hmm. But that story is not for us. It's for people who need to see representation of themselves, and that without that, we don't get Hamilton. Without that, we don't get Black Panther.
Yeah.
The power of this, I think, is just so amazing, and I want to see more stories like that represent different people. They're to the neckbeards, like I was saying, there's enough about you. Yeah. Every other story is about you. Allow other people to have a story.
Well, I mean, it's the
and
quote,
it's important.
It's the quote of when you're used to being in power, equality will feel like oppression.
Right.
And I think that's when all these, as you keep calling them, neckbeards, fantastic, their buttholes start to clench in reaction to these things. It's because of that feeling. You know what I mean? And also, I think, not to get into it, is the subconscious understanding that in order to be successful, you have to somehow be dominating another culture. And so I think that's why there is this worry that if Black Lives Matter and they build up, then they're going to kill the white people. It's like, no, because you're viewing it through your scope, which is in order to be successful and succeed, you must be dominating somebody else.
Right.
And that does not have to be true.
It does not have to be true. And rather than like living in some culture where you're filling roles that someone else defines for you, define your own role in your own space, in your own way, and let that be the thing that drives you to mental clarity and success. And I feel like that was the message I got from The Wiz, and I just appreciate so much what the power that must have for other people, and that, aren't represented as well as I am.
Mm-hmm. So if you are listening and you want to support some of the things we've been talking about, on our Instagram, there is a highlight story section that is it says BLM resources, because when I started compiling it, it was much more when people were signing petitions, calling numbers, it's still in a protest state as we speak, at the end of July. But there's also a lot of resources about mental health services, both if you are a person of color looking for therapy, both resources in order to obtain therapy and or directories of therapists who look more like you. There are different people and accounts and websites located in there. If you're looking for, also, if you are a white person like myself who are wanting to support this community, all of these foundations, organizations that we have linked in there, you can put your money in, open your purse and put your money to those sources. There's also ways, some of these organizations, where you can sponsor the professional growth of possible therapists of color. I think exactly what Hannah was speaking to, which is being mindful of the lack of resources that keep therapy from being both accessed by all communities, but also having therapists of all communities. And so there are a few, I can't think of any on the top of my head, unfortunately, I wasn't prepared. But there are some few, if you do some diving into the accounts I link in that highlight story, there are some places where you can sponsor therapists to both continuing education, but also their own personal growth. And so if you are listening and you're like, how can I do something? How can I help? I would encourage you to go to that as a starting place resource, and then go out to the accounts and websites I link and learn from them too. Like, don't just take it from us, but take it from these sources, start educating yourself. And you can find us at Popcorn Psychology on Instagram. At Facebook, we're at Popcorn Psychology. Twitter, we're at popcorn_psych. You can email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. We are always interested in feedback, both, positive and also critical. Like, we're still learning and growing as therapists in the community that are becoming more aware of where we have deficits in both our understanding, experience, and, for me specifically, like my whiteness. And so, we are always open for whatever anyone wants to explore with us. And if you have suggestions of more diverse movies that have been meaningful within different communities that you would like us to explore, we are more than thirsty for people's suggestions, as we are also examining the movies we've chosen to pick. They've been mostly white and mostly cisgendered straight movies. And not because, and we didn't even think about it, because we do pop culture, and most of pop culture is white, cisgendered, straight characters and
therein
stories.
Is the privilege.
Yeah, so we are open to whatever suggestions people want to throw our ways, and we appreciate any feedback, like we were saying. So thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.